Alright guys, I've got an argument out there that I've seen used for evolution. Now the argument is from biogeography. The argument is that biogeography cannot be explained by any kind of creationism, and that was put forth by Jerry Coyne in a talk in a lecture in 2009 that's available to watch on YouTube. Now what he was arguing was that first of all, what biogeography is it's the study of where we find different living things in the world. For example, we might find, just making something up, we might find the red tulip in this part of South America and not this part, and over in China and nowhere else in the world besides this part of South America and China. Or we might find this type of animal in this part of North America, and we might find it in another part of the world, and that's it. It's basically the study of where we find living things in the world in relation to geography and in relation to each other. And according to Jerry Coyne, biogeography, like I said, cannot be explained by any form of creationism. And he also says that this is the best argument for evolution. And what he was saying was that, well, since we might have an island. I'm just going to use an example. This is just an illustration. You might find an island near South America, and the finches on this island are very similar to the finches we find in South America. And he's like, now why would this be? If evolution weren't true. And he then argues that there's a lot of islands that have risen up out of the ocean where we'll find birds and reptiles, but we won't find any mammals. And he says that the counter argument from creationists, now this is not the counter argument that creationists will put forth, it's just the counter argument in Jerry's world, in his little world, where he says this is the argument that creationists will put forth, and it's a straw man argument. It's something that's made up. It's not the actual argument from creationists. He says, well, creationists think that these animals that we find elsewhere in the world couldn't survive on these islands. He's like, well, why, when God created the world, why didn't he just plop the animals there? And I'll get to there's a lot of different parts to this. His argument is a bit strange, so it's, this counter argument would be a little bit confusing, but the reason we find finches, for example, on an island near South America, they're very similar to the finches we find in South America, is because the finches migrated. Biogeography is really evidence for migration, not evidence for evolution. The reason we don't find these mammals on these islands is because they didn't migrate there. It was a little more difficult for them to get there, so they didn't get there. Then Jerry Coyne goes on to point out that, hey, well, human beings ended up introducing these mammals to these islands, and then they started destroying the island. And then he says, why wouldn't God have put the animal there? But that's like saying, why wouldn't you put a murderer in the middle of a daycare center? It's just an argument that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't follow. Now, this is how creationists would understand biogeography. And biogeography makes perfect sense in light of creation. Noah had the animals on the ark, the land animals. Remember, the animals that lived in the water, they wouldn't drown. There's a lot of evolutionists out there saying, well, how Noah couldn't have fit all of the animals in the world onto the ark, and then they end up calculating the whales in there. A little common sense. Come on, people. Noah didn't have to bring the whales on the ark. But when Noah brought the boat to the mountains of Ararat, when the flood was receding, the animals ended up eventually getting off the boat onto the mountains of Ararat, and then they spread out all over the world from there. And it would be, some of them probably crossed land bridge to get to North America. Evolutionists and creationists would both have to explain, how did the mammoths and mastodons, I'm pretty sure both of those are found in North America. How did they get to North America from Asia? And they probably crossed a land bridge. How did the mammals get to Australia? There's probably some kind of land bridge involved there. But to ask, why we don't find mammals native to Hawaii or the Galapagos, if I understood what Jerry Coyne was saying correctly, because this was his argument was kind of all over the place. It's because they didn't migrate there. Apparently, reptiles and birds have an easier time migrating. I don't know why reptiles would, but I know why birds would. I'm not a zoologist. My degree focused more on bacteria and working on cell cultures. But both creation and evolution are both totally compatible with biogeography. There might be some little nuances with it, but for example, it's if the world is really this old, then why does this aspect of biogeography occur? There might be arguments along those lines, as I've seen a few, but for the most part, biogeography is just evidence of migration. We have the reason the birds are on the island near South America is and not the cats that live in the jungle is because, well, the birds fly. They have a little easier time getting to the island. It's, and then the cats didn't get to the island because they didn't get there. They didn't find a floating log or whatever. Now, Jerry Coyne, he says, the reason that there was a mistake is Jerry Coyne was saying that, well, creationists believe that, in a nutshell, he was describing creationists as believing that the world was created exactly the way it is today and has never changed since. And of course, that's utter nonsense. It's not what creationists believe. And his quote that that biogeography cannot be explained by any kind of creationism, and it's just, if he had taken 5 minutes to go to a creationist website before writing his book, before giving his lecture, then he would know. He would know that, hey, Noah brought those animals on the ark, and then it was after they were on the ark, they spread from there all over the world. And it makes perfect sense that a lot of those islands that are surrounded by water, that the mammals would have a harder time getting there than the birds. That makes perfect sense either way. From an evolution perspective or a creation perspective, biogeography is explained by migration. And that's what it's evidence for. It's evidence for migration. It's not evidence that everything in the world came from one single-celled organism billions of years ago. It's just not. And one thing it is evidence for, though, is that species do change over time. Both creationists and evolutionists accept mutation and natural selection. Remember, there's PhD scientists on both sides of this. And the vast majority of things, they agree on the vast majority of things. Remember, was a creationist originally, came up with the idea of natural selection. His name was Edward Blyth. He wrote about 40 to 60 years. I can't remember exactly which one it was, either 40 or 60 years before Charles Darwin came out on the origin of species, and he was a young Earth creationist. And I'm pretty sure he was a young Earther, and I know he was a creationist. And you can read more. Leave me a comment if you want to read more about that. But in the meantime, hey, biogeography is explained by both. Evolution or creation, is explained by migration. Animals migrate. In both evolution and creation, animals migrate. Neither one teaches that the world is exactly the same as it always has been since the dawn of time. Neither evolution teaches that nor creation. It's just utter nonsense. Anyway, this is Greg out.